Varmt välkomna tillbaka. Den här timmens pass heter Industriell symbios och det kan vara världens vackraste ord. Vi ska få lyssna på både akademin och näringslivet med Startakademin och en herre på vars fråga när jag sa om ni kan få kliva på till en låt, vilken skulle det då bli? Tveklöst svarade I've got a feeling med Black Eyed Peas. Nu blir det ingen på-låt så att jag måste sjunga när Murat Mirata från Linköpings universitet ska få tala. I've got a feeling, Välkommen.
All right.
Take it away.
I'm not going to continue with the singing so that the watchers' numbers don't go down. But yeah, thank you very much for having me. My name is Murat Mirata, and I work at Linköping University Environmental Technology and Management Division. I work with creation and diffusion of knowledge so that we can address some of the challenges that has been talked about, and more specifically, we can improve the resource productivity so that we can do more with less, and we can start doing the right things and do them right afterwards. Anders laid it out very clearly and very elegantly that we are basically faced with a flux problem, that we are using too much of what we know is of limited supply, and we are also discharging too much back to the nature, which we know is causing irreversible damage. And this worked on for quite a while. It was very cheap to buy, very cheap to waste, but things are changing. Resource prices are on the escalation. There are more of us. People are wealthier. They demand better lifestyles. And we are increasingly faced with societal challenges that are interconnected. On one hand, we need to keep the industry competitive, preferably improve their competitiveness. At the other side of the equation, more and more people want to live in the urban areas and they want better lifestyles, and we would like to provide better lifestyles to those people. And of course, they live rural areas behind without enough manpower, so we need to do something about that. And we need to find a way of doing all of these within the limits of the nature without causing any further damage that we already talked about, Anders already talked about it. And because of that, there are sensible calls being made that we need to improve resource productivity by factors, factor 5, 10, 20. Unfortunately, it doesn't show on my slide, but you are already familiar with. And they are not necessarily very new to us. We have known about this for a very long time. But the success of our economic system was very much based on specialization, product specialization, market specialization. And we are also trying to address this problem with the same mindset. We are trying to work within silos. We are trying to make resource productivity gains, which is a very good starting point, because the closer to the source that we address something, the better we are positioned. One major problem is that the progress we make with these kind of approaches is not enough. We are at best getting a couple of percentage points of improvements. So this doesn't take us anywhere near to the factor improvements that are needed to address the challenges that we are faced with. So we need to think and act in new ways so that we can actually address those key challenges. And that thinking and acting needs to go beyond the silo approach. We need to think beyond individual facilities, products, or organizations or sectors. And as Anders also mentioned, there is now a growing interest in creating more circular and bio-based economies, which should serve as a foundation to actually create this new mindset and help us make progress in the desired direction. But it is not entirely clear how we're going to get there. We don't have a lot of tools, a lot of examples that actually show us how this can be done. And let me also remind you some of the key challenges that we face with the circular and bio-based economies. To start with, the world is actually fairly circular when it comes to certain materials. Anders already mentioned that. Today you cannot go to a port site in the Western world without seeing a big pile of metal or glass or bales of paper and stuff. These things we are already circulating to a fair degree. What is left for us to do is to collect the higher hanging fruits. And there, the starting point vis-a-vis the fossil-based industry is not really on our side. Because we need to deal with resources that are distributed, that are heterogeneous, that are polluted, as opposed to fossil resources that we actually just dig from a hole in large quantities, in good volumes, in good usability. So the expectation with circular and bio-based economies is that we can improve the resource security, we can reduce the environmental impact and advance business development, But the starting point doesn't really support that all those things can be done because of the challenges that we have. The feedstock, as I said, is not very well on our advantage. It needs to be harvested as compared to mined with the fossil resources. That increases the transportation costs. So economies of scale is not as available as it is for the other production systems. And processing needs are very high. That requires a lot of energy, a lot of manpower. And because of that, we also create a lot of byproducts that needs to be taken care of. On top of that, we also need to realize a political and technical regime change that is more supportive of bio-based and circular economies. So there's a lot of challenges. And I think we heard quite a lot about the negative side of things. But let me provide you with a bit of inspiration. And the inspiration will come from a tomato, a Swedish one in this case, a manufacturing plant that is producing chemicals, and a biorefinery that is continuously evolving and the system around that. So if we start with the tomato, everybody likes them. Swedes continue to eat them more and more. And in general, if you buy a kilo of Swedish tomato, that represents about 1 kilo of CO2 emissions. But not in that particular case. The second largest tomato producer in Sweden, in Älleholms tomato, if the tomato, you can find their tomatoes, sometimes even cheaper than the tomatoes that we import from Netherlands. So they are running a very successful business. And if tomatoes were sold with a CO2 label, they will look like this. The Dutch tomatoes will have a very big label. The tomatoes from Älleholms can hardly be visible because the production there actually emits 50 times less CO2 as compared to the tomatoes we import from Netherlands, and 20 times less as compared to the Swedish average. And the reason that happens is that rather than running their own energy system, in Älleholms tomatoes, they take the residual heat from a nearby pulp and paper mill. And the CO2 that is used to accelerate the plant growth is also taken from a vodka production plant nearby. Another example comes from Helsingborg. Kemira is a chemical plant located in Helsingborg, and it is actually part of a circular production loop, you can say. They are taking the sulfur-rich refinery residues and producing sulfuric acid from that product. That's an exothermic process, meaning that a lot of heat is released in the process. So Kemira has been utilizing that heat on the site, giving some excess energy to the other activities. But what really changed in 1970s after the oil crisis is that the nearby town of Helsingborg is also in need of a lot of energy. So a collaboration has been established. The residual heat today goes to Helsingborg, meeting about 30, perhaps more of the city's energy needs. And this generates a lot of additional revenues for an industry which is very traditional, where innovations are very scarce. At best, you can get a couple of percentage points improvements. And in here, we are looking double-digit percentage revenue increases. And the city also benefits. It has a very low CO2 district heating, and it's very competitively priced. And the system in Helsingborg doesn't stop there. There are a number of additional circular systems in place. The energy system, some of the waste generated by the local community is turned into different energy products. The water, the energy that is already embedded in the wastewater is recovered with the help of heat pumps and brought back to the community. The waste circles don't stop there. The organic material that is generated both by the city but also in the nearby activities is actually collected, used for the biogas production. The fuel feeds back to the transportation system in the city. The biodigestate that can be used as an organic fertilizer goes back to the farmers, and then it completes the loop. In recent years, other companies have been benefiting from this. Johnson & Johnson has a subsidiary in Helsingborg. First, they start to use district heating. A couple of years ago, they just replaced the remaining natural gas with biogas. So because of their carbon dioxide superior performance, they were the eligible site globally to get the €7 million investment to expand their operations. And there are other developments that the waste infrastructure has been expanding, that the local utility company realizes that they can actually open up the doors. And rather than being an operator, they can be an infrastructure producer so that people with the competencies and the drive can come in, tap into the resources, and create new products, new circular solutions, new circular businesses. And it works fairly well. So let me also tell you as my last example from Norrköping. As you know, Norrköping is only about 40 kilometers away from us, and historically has an industrial background of working with forestry resources. So pulp and paper industry is big one in the region and stuff. And things started to happen in Norrköping in 1950s. By then, family-owned service provider company realized that there were a number of materials arising from the pulp and paper production that was not utilized. So they said, can we take them and do something? They said, okay. And all of a sudden, those materials started to be used as soil production inputs. Things start to get interesting when there was the movement in Sweden that we started to replace individual boilers in the buildings in cities with a district heating system. So Norrköping followed suit, and a centralized heating system was set up in early in late 60s. Later on, this plant was upgraded so that it can utilize the residues from the forestry. And in the process, it was also changed to produce both electricity and power. So it became a combined heat and power plant. Later on, in early 2000s, another upgrade was installed in the plant, so that in addition to the forestry residues, the waste materials that are generated by the communities as well as the industry can be used as an energy source. Things start to get really interesting in early 2000s when the Swedish Farmers Association Lantmännen decided to set up Sweden's first ethanol biofuel plant. The investigations show that if Lantmännen established in Norrköping, they did not need to set up and operate their own energy system. They can tap into what E.ON could have provided them, the neighboring CHP plant. On top of that, they could get access to green steam, which is one of the major determinants of the environmental profile of the product. So the plant was set up. It could take the grain from the farmers. But as you may know, if you put 100 units of grain into an ethanol plant, you will only get 33 units of ethanol. And another 33 will come out as organic waste, mostly protein-rich, and the remaining 33 will be CO2 of biogenic nature. So Lantmännen also started to valorize those byproduct streams, that the organic materials that are protein-rich is dried and processed and is being converted into fodder. I'll come back to the CO2 part. But there are still some residues, and those residues are sent into a biogas plant, which is then combined with other biogas that is produced in the wastewater treatment works, upgraded, and goes back to the city as transportation fuel, both for the public and the private transportation. In 2015, Lantmännen had an agreement with AGA, the chemical management company, production and management company, and they started to recover the CO2 and introduce that as a green product to the market. Before that point, Sweden was a net importer of fossil CO2 to be used in the industry and to produce our carbonated drinks. So it actually really stimulated a change. And in the recent years, what is also happening is that starch-rich residues from food processing industry is substituting some of the virgin grain that is being used in ethanol production. As a result, Lantmännen can produce one of the world's largest grain-based biofuels that is reducing the CO2 emissions by more than 90%. There is another factor 20 improvement. But it is not only the ethanol production that benefits, because the regional energy mix has changed since 1990s, that while by that time about 90% of the regional energy mix was from fossil resources, today the share of fossil or primary resources is less than 5%. And a lot of other actors gain in the process. The fodder that we produce substitutes about 1/3 of the protein that is imported from other places. There are new businesses being set up. The productivity gains of the energy plant has been drastically increased. Some of the other actors, like the pulp and paper mill, gains significant CO2 reductions. We have competitive fertilizer being produced for the farmers, and so on and so on. And it doesn't stop there, because these exchanges are not always on material and energy and resource exchanges. Another interesting collaboration that actually allows Lantmännen to be in a partnership to launch a new sustainable mobility solution is the so-called ETHA initiative. So what happens there is the Swedish vehicle manufacturer Scania having certain capabilities with transportation technologies and transportation optimization, has a partnership with Landmännen who can actually produce very high sustainable profiling fuels, and together they can actually launch new products and initiatives that help stimulate the desired developments. So all of these things we refer to as industrial and urban symbiosis, and they refer to collaborations among diverse actors and sectors that increase the productivity with which we can utilize different resources, and that stimulates eco-innovations. And it is an interesting approach because it really helps us allow to address those challenges that I talked about. The innovative collaborations and the collaborative innovations that result can actually make us, help us to make progress towards more circular and more bio-based economies by helping to offset a number of the challenges that I talked about earlier. And we have many examples in Sweden of these kind of networks already operating. As a hobby project, we study them, and we studied more than 35 of those already. But that doesn't mean that we exploited the potential. As Anders also mentioned, that we are currently losing a lot of value in the material cycles after their first use. About 75% in only 4 material streams is being lost. We are still wasting a lot of energy from the industry. If half of that energy was utilized in greenhouses similar to Elaholm, we might be creating 20,000 more jobs in Sweden. We have large potential to produce more biogas. About 150,000 tons of the fly ash from which we can recover useful materials is being sent to Norway to be landfilled. So we are really approaching, or we come to a stage that we need to move from these self-organized networks and facilitate their developments more systemically. And we have good knowledge on the challenges for these kind of developments. These things are not as spread as we would like to because they are complex, they are difficult, they need changes to be made in multiple domains. But we also know that there are effective ways of influencing them so as to create better conditions and stimulate the desired developments. And Sweden has very important strengths to do that. We have a lot of operational examples to learn from. We have good technical infrastructure. We have district heatings in place. We have industries and cities fairly close to each other. We have interesting industrial sectors that actually help to create these kind of relationships. We have good trust and cooperation between actors, public-private and private-private. We have very strong public sector. We have strong authorities. We have network associations that can serve as the spiders in the web. We have also very strong knowledge capacity. And we have the publicly owned utility companies as well as other utility companies that recognize the value of collaboration, and as well as the regenerative industries. So a way to do that is to the so-called creation of the institutional capacity for industrial and urban symbiosis. And that is achieved by motivating the actors, improving the relationships between different actors and building communities, creating knowledge about opportunities, and supporting the implementation. And if you are wondering if this is at all possible, it is, and Sotenäs serves as one of the good examples. What happened in Sotenäs about 10 years back is that 3 of the Sweden's largest seafood production companies were faced with the challenge of their increasing business volumes, which resulted in increasing wastewater generation. And they were faced with the risk of shutting down and moving elsewhere. And instead of addressing the problem individually, they said, how about we join forces and try to deal with it collectively? So a biogas operator took the lead, and they said we can treat the water and in the process create biogas that can actually be used as fuel and fertilizer in the area. And that opened up a lot of new opportunities. They said, okay, why not add to that a land-based fish farming for which wastewater will be a major problem as well? So from there on, the local actors continued to brainstorm, and they developed a very interesting development vision, which was then used by the local actors to actually convince the local politicians to set up a symbiosis centrum that drove these kind of developments. And today, if you look at Sotenäs, you realize that there are some very interesting, very circular, very bio-based developments in place, closing the loops around biomaterials as well as plastics. And it didn't stop there. Because of these relationships, it was also the choice for a new development company that wants to set Europe's largest land-based fish farming plant in Sotenäs. So, what can we do to take it further? If you are businesses, you may want to complement your traditional worldview and mindset of me, my products, and my value chain with an additional mindset which should encourage you to think about us, my haves, or my needs, and collaborative potentials. It is time to embrace the openness, the collaboration, and integration with other actors that are not necessarily in your organizational fields. It is also time to foster transparent and equitable business models. In today's ecosystem where information is so easily accessible, the business models of yesterday do not really work. And we need to allocate resources and develop capabilities to actually make progress with these kind of things. Don't forget that collaboration is most probably the next strategic resource that we have in this country to actually achieve some of the objectives that we want. For local and regional public authorities or public authorities in general, there's also quite a lot that can be done. Stimulation of the social processes is one of the most obvious ones. Bring people together, create platforms for dialogue, help people to identify collaboration opportunities. Also, setting the rules of the game is very important. We do not need to expect everything from the national or AU levels. You can do quite a lot by making the secondary resources, renewable resources, more attractive for the local regional economies. It is also time to think holistically. Why not move from utility management to resource management? Why not look into the planning and development process with a system view in addition to the individual facility view? And also help create markets for better products and services. So as Anders was saying, use the public procurement for that purpose. There's also something that needs to be done with the knowledge institutions, but I think I'm running out of my time, so I will jump over these. But I just want to mention something very quickly. That there's increasing number of people who would like to make progress with circular and bio-based economies. There's a lot of good examples to learn from, and there's a lot of knowledge residing in different places. And if you bring them together, we can most probably help everybody. For that purpose, what we are trying to do for over the years is we have set up a Swedish network that is trying to stimulate industrial and urban symbiosis, trying to move towards a vision that you see in here. So please come and join us in that network and help us to make the progress that we are all interested in. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Mirat, please come to me to collaborate on answering your question. You have a question.
Yes, I would like to hear your views about how can you or your organization can support scaling up industrial and urban symbiosis practices.
A very good question, and you have a few answers already. Do you want to read them? By doing what we have decided to do makes you kind of curious, eh?
Yeah, it depends on what was it that you decided to do.
Exactly, we want to know. Create platforms for interaction between people, business, and public actors. How do you mentioned a few very good strategies for that as a facilitator and a public partner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. I mean, the public organizations already have the networks. They already have the workflows. They bring companies together in regular meetings, etc. Why not just pitch the idea in one of those meetings? Why not ask people the question of coming to the next meeting by thinking about what they need and what they have, and to understand whether they can be matches between the common needs and capacities.
Very good. So you say we're especially good in Sweden at collaborating.
I think so.
Are you working with this even better than the regular Swede?
Good question. I cannot say. I think perhaps sometimes Swedes are a bit too lagom.
Lagom.
I mean, I think we can be tiny bit more aggressive. We have a lot of good examples. There's no shame in talking about them. We have a lot of good structures. It is time to recognize them and build on them.
Yep.
But no, I would not say I'm better than others. I think a lot of people are doing a great job out there.
Murat, I've got a feeling, the song that you love. What's your feeling now?
My feeling is always positive. I mean, I would like to see the glass as half full And I mean, I think I see that a lot more people are now interested in these kind of things. There's a lot more support. I really think that maybe not tonight, but the coming days and the coming years will be much better than we have seen before.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Please take place där. Så ska vi över till våran nästa gäst. För nu är det